Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We will be joined shortly by Rich Blue of the Center for Christian Life Enrichment. He'll be speaking on dynamic interventions, making transformational shifts in family systems. This is part 2 of Rich's webinar series on family systems. The date today is August 22nd. It is 11:30 Central Standard Time, and Rich will be sharing with you the tips and skills to make dynamic family interventions. But before we get to that, just to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are the Center for Christian Life Enrichment. We're located in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and we have 50-plus years of experience and almost more than a decade of graduate education between our 5 therapists. We're an emotionally focused therapy center and have an emotionally focused approach to counseling, and we blend the cutting edge of psychology and Christian principles. And our presenter today, Rich Blue, is a licensed clinical professional counselor and also the founder and director of the Center for Christian Life Enrichment. He is an ordained minister, has been practicing in the field of clinical psychology for more than 25 years, and worked on Campus Crusade, and has partnered with dozens of churches in the Chicagoland area. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Rich, and he will tell you more about intervening in family systems.
Well, good afternoon. I'm so glad that you could join us. We are talking today about system wisdom, and this is the second part of a series that we have been doing, and we will review some of the principles as we go through this morning. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit of a story from my own experience that led me to really want to dig in deeper to our understanding of systems and system theory. I was reading Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, and I was reminded of the fact that there is a natural tendency in our life to make growth, to have growth and make changes, but we reach a place where we plateau, and the growth and development seems to stop. And what we find in system theory is that this is what happens when we attempt to solve a problem on a superficial instead of a core level. Solutions that address symptoms achieve quick results that ultimately don't last because they fail to address the fundamental cause of the problem. One of Senge's aphorisms is, "Don't push growth. Instead, remove the factors limiting growth." Don't push growth, remove the factors limiting growth. This is a piece of wisdom that empowers us to think from a systems perspective instead of a symptom perspective. So I was looking at my own life and where am I plateauing, and it immediately came to mind in my pursuit of fitness and wellness in my life. And so one of the first steps that Senge recommends is that we identify the positive reinforcing processes. In other words, what is working in our plan that preceded us reaching a plateau. And so what has happened is that in my life I've done a number of different things to increase my fitness and my wellness. I've recruited and enlisted the help of several experts. I, for months, have been exercising every day for 45 to 60 minutes. I've eliminated several major food groups, like, for instance, sugars and breads. I still can't believe I've done that, but I've not been able to successfully eliminate peanut butter from my diet, but that's probably part of why I plateaued. My blood work is fantastic, energy, positive attitude, aliveness, and a real sense of self-efficacy, a confidence that, wow, I can do this. But one of the areas where I plateaued was weight loss. And so I got to the place where I'd lost about, 50-plus pounds, and I hit this wall where it just seemed I tried all kinds of different things and couldn't break through. So what happens when we reach a wall or a plateau is that usually we do one of 3 things. First is we quit. It's when we've, made progress in an area, we were excited about the results, but we can't seem to address the fact that we aren't making any more progress, so we just stop. And usually It's the rubber band effect where we end up not only losing the gains we've made, but we add some more. The second thing is what people seem to do, especially when they're looking at it from a system perspective, is that they redouble their efforts and try to do more of the same, more hard work, more discipline, more structure, more accountability, and usually it just postpones the cycle and the plateau returns. But what Sandy is encouraging, and what's encouraging me, is that if we think about it from a system perspective, what we begin to do then is that we have the opportunity to look below for a more fundamental system type of solution that addresses the foundations of the issue and the foundation of the problem. So this is what we're really going to talk about today. But before I get into that and how that worked, I want to just review some of the important principles that we talked about in terms of system theory. And one of the things that's very important is to understand that for me, this awareness happened. I certainly had studied family systems and I talked about it, but to realize the extent to which I viewed the world through an individual or a parts perspective instead of viewing it through a systems or a whole perspective. So there are 6 components of a family system that I want to review with you. One is that a family system has interrelated elements and structure. So we used the example in our first talk about just a baseball team where you have all kinds of different players that play different positions and have different functions and different roles. And so to try to make an intervention simply by working with one player, one position, or one role obviously is not going to be ultimately effective. But in every system that there's a predictable pattern of interaction that seems to emerge, and if you follow it and you track it, it is always going to be the same. So systems have elements and structure that are interrelated. They have predictable patterns of interaction, and that there are boundaries. The systems, who's in and who's out of a system. Systems have ways of including and excluding elements and members. Open systems refer to systems that interact with other systems outside the environment. Closed systems, on the other hand, refer to systems having relatively little interaction with other systems or the outside environment. So, for example, living organisms are considered open systems because they take in substances from their environment, such as food, air, and water, and return other substances to the environment. In contrast, a watch is an example of a closed system in that it's relatively self-contained, self-maintaining unit that has little interaction or exchange with its environment. So a third quality, systems have boundaries. They're either open and closed, and there's usually some degree on a continuum in which that's true. Systems are also synergistic. A synergy or synergism is most often refers to the phenomenon of 2 or more discrete influences or agents acting in common to create an effect which is greater than the sum of the effects each is able to create independently. Simply, we're used to the Gestalt phrase that says the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Another component of a family system is that systems they make it their aim to maintain conformity. They want their members, they want to shape them and affect them and influence them. And that systems have subsystems. In a classic family, you would have a marital subsystem, a parental subsystem, and a sibling subsystem. So, characteristics of a family system, let me just review 5 of those with you. They're organized to maintain homeostasis. The main objective of the system is to maintain itself. Systems also resist change. One of the fundamental strategies of maintaining homeostasis in any system is to resist anything that's different, new. Those things are perceived as a threat. The third characteristic of a family system is members adopt roles. So in a family system where many of you are familiar with the common roles of a hero, the placater, which is the people pleaser, the scapegoat, the black sheep, the one that acts out, the lost child, the one that just seems to accommodate and adjust and almost is invisible, And the mascot, often the youngest, is just sort of the one that's the entertainer that has lots of energy and dramatic and very comfortable bringing aliveness and energy to the system. Each role has a function. So one of the critical things when you're thinking system, when you think about your family, your business, the team you're on, is to identify each role that each person plays, and then imagining what functions does that role, do they play in that role. Another thing is triangles. It's called triangling, thanks to Murray Bowen. Triangling is a strategy for dealing with anxiety, stress, and conflict. And in interpersonal systems, this is the dynamic when things break down between two people. Usually the effort is to draw a third party in and to try to incorporate them into the solution, when in reality it just sustains the problem. Last point is that crises create an opening for system change and transformation. When things break down, it's very important that we recognize that it is offering a special opportunity for us to make a change in the core operating function of a system, and we want to take advantage of that, which is the point of our talk today. Dynamic interventions in the family system. How do we do that? We've begun to understand some of what's involved in a system, but now we want to look at 4 keys in intervening in family systems. The first is to observe and assess the system, not the individual. The temptation in any given situation is to try to view a problem through the lens of just an individual instead of the whole of which the individual is a part. This is the principle of holism. You cannot understand a system by simply identifying and understanding the parts. They all interact with each other and are independent. For example, the suspension system of a car. Think about what would you say makes up a car's suspension. Originally, I thought it consisted, I would have answered to say, well, it's the shock absorbers and the springs. But when you see this slide in front of you, you begin to recognize that the car suspension system involves all kinds of different elements and components: ball joints, tie rods, struts, control arms, stabilizer bars, even the steering system. These were things that I was totally surprised to understand. And within this automotive system is a series of subsystems. You may recognize on this slide all these different warning lights that are often not very helpful, because when I see them, I have no idea what they are and have to look up in my German manual what in the world they mean. But what they're really telling us is within a car, which would be like a family, a group, a team, a corporation, there are a host of different subsystems. So let me give you an example that I learned of from one of my clients who is an expert in automotive suspension systems. That they encountered a problem in one of their designs where they recognized that a person was driving and they experienced a ton of vibration in the steering wheel. And so in their assessment, they identified that there was something, I can't explain what it was, but it had to do with the brake shoes themselves and the rotor and where they combine. So when you think about getting rid of the vibration in the steering, I would have assumed once they assessed that the problem involved the rotor and the brake pads, that they would somehow redesign the rotor or re-engineer the brake pads or something like that. Well, what I was surprised to find out was that what they actually ended up doing was not changing the brakes. They didn't improve the steering. There weren't better rotors. That would have been approaching the problem through a symptom perspective instead of a system perspective. What the engineers actually did to resolve the problem was they put in heavier or stronger bushings that absorbed the vibration. The bushings were something that, to me, would have been in a different part of the suspension. But my point is, I'm certainly not an engineer or an auto mechanic, but what I am is someone that's used to working on rotors and brakes, only to realize that then when you correct that, there's still vibration in the steering system. and how many times have I needed to think differently? And that's really what we're talking about. When you think about systems, what you want to do is train your mind to think with a very different perspective. You want to be like a social psychologist, social anthropologist. So what I think of it as is I think of viewing a system like from a tree fort. And so I think of a cultural anthropologist overlooking a new society, a new tribe, something like that that they'd never viewed before, and sitting up. And what they do is they observe and they assess and they ask questions. And so when I'm working with a family now, I try to picture myself looking at the family as if I was looking like from a tree fort. And I'm looking down on them, and I'm seeing the different roles, and I'm seeing the different behaviors that are happening, and I'm beginning to observe the individuals and try to make sense. What is it that they are doing? And maybe I'll be able to identify a role. Let's say if I was looking down on a community and I say, he's the chief, or he's the medicine man, or he's the sergeant at arms or something. And then to begin to identify what function does each of those roles serve. So when we look at a system, one of the critical things we want to do is much like we would teach our kids when about safety in crossing the street. We tell them stop, look, and listen. This is a critical thing when you're encountering a problem with your friends, in your family, or in your business. You want to try to extricate yourself from the system and begin to look at it from a very different and a more objective perspective. Now, this is very challenging since it seems clearly evident that we are unable to see the systems that we are a part, certainly as clearly as we're able to see other places. So, we think from a system perspective. We begin to then ask system-based questions. Now, the most important question that I have found most helpful is, what is the function of this behavior? So what is the purpose in this system that this behavior is serving? Everything has a purpose. What is the system expressing and addressing in terms of its needs? It's trying to create some sort of balance. So some of the needs that would be present in a family system would include these kinds of things. The need or the yearning for closeness versus distance, hunger, attention, affection, finding worth and value, meaning, the expression of feelings, and a sense of responsibility, just to name a few. And so one of the things we look at is, how is stress and tension being expressed in the system? And there's four, ways that we see that commonly happening that you can identify in your family. There's marital conflict between the husband and the wife. Spouses break down, and they pull away. The individual themselves break down. So they may be in conflict then one or other of the spouses may break down. There's a breakdown, an act in the children, or an emotional distance, a cutting off that can kind of happen when people separate themselves. So there's different kinds of strategies that tell us, symptoms that tell us that there's a deeper issue going on that we need to address. And that takes us to our fourth point, which is intervening. So one of the things when we attempt to intervene in a family system is that we have to be very careful of the fact that there are issues of enmeshment and absorption into the system. We call it getting hooked. When you are involved in a family and you are trying to help and trying to support, it is very easy for you to get involved in and become a part of the system, and it's something that you want to avoid. You want to try to get in and get out quickly. One of the critical strategies that I have found most helpful in this process is using questions. Most often when we're trying to help, what the things we want to do is we want to be helpful. So we want to be the source of that help. We want to be recognized for the fact that we're trying to be helpful, and we want to be acknowledged. The problem is what that usually requires of us is to try to give suggestions, to give advice, and to do those kinds of different things. That is not a system approach. So I want to take you back now to my situation and my story and see if we can't bring these things together as an example that you can relate to. So when I recognized that I had reached a plateau and identified the fact that I had accomplished many significant things that were very, very valuable, losing 55 pounds, having a discipline that I sustained over months of exercising for 40 to 60 minutes a day. These were no big deal accomplishments. Cutting sugar out of my diet was a challenge. So the problem is that when you reach the plateau, often what happens is you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you get so discouraged because it's like, wow, I've done all these great things and I'm still, in this case, not losing more weight. Well, instead, what I did was that I thought, if by nature I have a hard time seeing my own system, then how am I going to see what's going on? Well, this is where I retained the support of a consultant, a more knowledgeable other that can see my system and help me to make a deeper, more systemic change instead of a superficial change. Now, I don't want to misunderstand that the changes that I made in terms of diet and exercise were significant. Losing 55 pounds was significant, but it reaches a point where it's no longer significant. And if I just try to do more of the same types of things, I'm just going to become increasingly frustrated and give up, and then the rubber band effect will take effect. We don't want that to happen. But if I operate from a perspective that says, I can't see my own system, and I need the perspective of someone outside my system in order to help me, now we can start gaining some significant momentum. So I began to ask questions of my system, saying, what is the function of this plateau? Why is it that I don't seem to be able to break this weight barrier? What are the factors limiting my progress, and what's the function of the plateau? Now, time will preclude us from being able to go into the depths of that, but I can tell you, just to summarize a couple things, one is I think that there was a fear of losing my sense of who I am. Part of my identity has always been around being big and strong and tough and all these different kinds of things. And I think at some level, deeper down in my system, the reason things were clamping down, in part, was the fact that I was afraid of losing my sense of self, that if I would get too thin or lose enough weight, that it would change who I was. The second thing was, I think I discovered through the help of these questions that were being asked of me, is that I was able to identify that I think that there was an issue of safety or security for me. I grew up in an environment as a kid that was at times threatening, and I associated my size and strength with an ability to be able to protect myself when things would happen that were unexpected. And I think at some level inside, earlier in my system, my internal family system, right, that I was afraid that if I got too thin or too small or something, that I would then become a target and again I would get in trouble. So this consultant said, well, let's try something. And we believe in experiential versus cognitive learning. So the suggestion was, let's try an intervention. And so what he said to me is, how about if you just try tracking everything that you eat, and let's rate it on a scale of a 1, a 2, or a 3. A 1 would be something that you eat that's absolutely energy-driven. It's fuel for your body. It makes perfect sense. You're hungry. You need it. You eat it. A 2 would be something that you eat that's not completely because you're hungry, but has an emotional component to it. And 3 is clearly emotional eating. Now, I must tell you, when he said, let's track your eating, I'm thinking counting calories, and I already could feel the resistance coming on. But there was something about this system, this new idea, that gave me a perspective and allowed me to see a deeper system that was happening. And this is the game that we're talking about, increasing consciousness. And the result for me was a significant increase in my awareness. I began to understand the processes that were going on, and I started to have a surge of enthusiasm and hope and energy that had been lost as a result of the discouragement of stepping on the scale and not seeing my weight be lower every time I got on there. I began to track patterns of when I ate, what types of food I ate, and began to realize that these are significantly related. And I realized that I can be the master of this area of my life. I do not need to be a slave to a system that previously was operating outside of my awareness. As I began to track my food, I began to recognize that I can deal with this and I can handle this. So, some observations I want to make is that system theory, when you really understand what's going on at a system level, it gives you the resources and the tools with the support of other people to be able to make lasting changes in your lives. You can make breakthroughs, and I'm sure many of you today that are listening to this webinar are thinking in your minds of areas where you've made progress for a time and gotten stuck, and that you can have help. Well, here's my suggestion to you. Use what we've talked about today to increase your understanding of your symptoms, of your systems. Looking for symptoms where things are not working, get help, get someone that can be an outside observer that could help you begin to identify what is the purpose of this resistance, what's the function of the behavior, and experience growing change and transformation in your life. So let me tell you of some next steps that might just fit in perfectly for you in terms of with your supporting you in this change. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to have a complimentary 30-minute consultation with me or one of my staff to be able to just talk about what we worked on today and to identify an area in your life where you'd like to see a breakthrough. We would love to support you with that. Please check out our website at www.cle.us.com, where you can see we have under our resources tabs quite a few different opportunities for you to listen to talks that talk about the ABCs of CLE and other webinars that we've done. You can see on this slide, you can contact us. We're on everything. You can see my blog at outoftheblueblog.us and Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but we would love to hear from you. So thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.